and welcome to part 1 of Acrylic Portraits, part of the Painting for Pleasure series of videos. My name's Penny and I shall be guiding you through this process. We'll be starting with some basic drawing ideas, going through the blocking in of the tonal study, and that will take us to the end of this video. There are 2 further videos that will take you to the completed full colour portrait. First of all, a couple of tips about choosing the right portrait. It's really difficult when you're faced with a lot of photographs to find the one that would make a good painting, and it's often perhaps not the one that you would like. So what should you be looking for? First of all, try to find one that's got a really good strong light and shade and some definition. That would help you a lot. Secondly, try to find one, preferably a 3/4 shot. That gives you the bone structure of the nose and the chin and the cheek, rather than just having a full straight-on headshot. Don't find one of Auntie Mildred if she's third from the left in a 5x7 group shot. You're not going to be able to get a good picture from that. So find a picture that's got a lot of really fine detail. Even if you're going to work quite loosely, you need the information in the first place, otherwise you're just making it up. Try to find a picture that has got strong light and shade. If it's too washed out, it can be very difficult to paint it. You may be tempted to use a school photo or something like that, but they, like a lot of professional shots, have been extremely bleached out, and most of the darker shades and tones that you would be interested in as a painter have been removed. So be very careful when you use anything like that. So having found the right photograph, how do you get it onto your board? Here I've got a canvas board and I've used a mechanical pencil, a 2B. You may decide to draw from life, you might want to trace it from a photograph, you might want to grid it from a photograph. Whatever you choose to do, just make sure it is as accurate as possible. The drawing itself is the skeleton of the painting, but if the drawing is incorrect, then the painting will follow suit, and sometimes it can play like Chinese whispers. 2 final thoughts. If you've got a dark background, then use a white pastel pencil to draw with, and always be fairly light with your drawing. Don't put in heavy blocks of graphite. It makes the paint muddy. So after that chit chat, I think we're ready to start painting. And the first thing we need to think about are paintbrushes. So here are my selection, and as you can see they are very cheap and cheerful. The first thing you really need to know, and perhaps the only thing you need to know, is how stiff the bristle itself is. Now you can see mine are mostly, in fact entirely synthetic. There are no proper bristle brushes there at all. But some of them are more responsive than others. Now you can see that, how it resists the paper. Well, that's exactly what I want. If they become too flippy floppy, like this for example, you really can't push the paint around, you're just spreading it about. You really want to be able to dig into that paint and move it, but you can't do that with a splodgy paintbrush. So let's think about the photograph that we've chosen to paint. Now it's really important that you get it printed well. Here's the one I'm using, and here's one that I printed earlier, and if you can see the difference, and I think you can even on the video, the right one is really pink and it's taken the colour. If you look at the background particularly, you can see how all the colours are distorted, which makes the whole face, if you compare them, really pink. It won't do. So we'll chuck that one. This one has been printed well and I can use that. I don't usually use just one photo, so here I've got a much lighter version of the original. As you can see in the first one, there are a lot of dark shadows where you can't make anything out, but in this one, now you can clearly see the eyebrow and the hair and the beard. All of those details which normally you wouldn't be able to make out at all are suddenly completely clear, particularly around the neck here and what's happening around the neck. Now, as you can see, I've drawn from the pale version. It makes such a difference when you're trying to paint if you understand what's going on underneath. I also like to have an enlargement or close-up of the portrait itself, so I can really see what's going on, particularly in the eyes, which are quite difficult to see in the smaller version. And the other shot that I like to have too is a monochrome version. This is particularly useful if you're doing a sepia print. It really gives you a good idea of where the stronger tones are. So now we are ready to paint. I want a very quick drying paint, so I'm not using the Golden Open for this. This is just a very cheap acrylic. It's a Van Dyke brown. You could use a burnt umber. You're after a kind of a muted, dirty sort of brown. If you put one that's too red, it tends to distract a little bit, and you want something that just looks like a tone rather than a colour. Now you'll notice that I've mixed an awful lot of water with this, and I'm just brushing it on. I don't want it to dry too quickly, so it needs to be fairly wet. As you paint, you will notice that it becomes noticeably grey, and that's because it's lifting up all the loose graphite. But that's a good thing, because what it's doing is fixing the graphite, and you won't have to worry about it lifting up then when you come to paint later on with true colour. And now while it's wet, I'm taking out a damp cloth, and I'm going to start lifting out the lightest tones in the portrait. That includes the clothes. And now I'm going to quickly dry that with the hairdryer. So now it's bone dry, and I've blocked it out quite nicely. Now I need to find some really dark tones. On this particular picture, the darkest tone is easily the hat. There are other aspects of it that are equally dark, but I know for sure that that is going to be the blackest part of the portrait. You may well find, if you're doing yours, that the eyes, the pupil of the eye, will be the blackest part. There may be other areas too, but at this stage, having the very darkest dark and also the lightest light gives me a really good scale in which to work on and put in all those mid-tones. So that's a tip that I would certainly pass on to anyone. Pull out the lightest tones and then start painting in the darkest tones, and you should get your mid-tones not too far off. I'm also now painting with the Golden Open acrylics. These are paints that stay wet for a very long time, a little bit shorter drying time than oils, but certainly a hell of a lot longer than your standard acrylics. And that gives me a lot of flexibility when I'm trying to blend in things like flesh tones. The rest of the video is now going to be speeded up. You will notice occasionally I thin out the paint, particularly on the face itself. When I do this, I will be using Gloss Medium, which is part of the Golden Open range. If you don't have Gloss Medium, you can actually buy it for ordinary acrylic paints, but if you don't have that, you could use water. I prefer to use Gloss Medium. It gives the paint a really nice consistency when you're working, and also, of course, most importantly, it doesn't evaporate and doesn't dry out, so you have a much longer working time in which to play around with it. to quickly finish off the painting with a few marks here and there on the t-shirt, just to indicate where the shadow should be. And that is it. The underpainting is complete, and now I have all the tones and all the values that I need to put the colour on, and it makes such a difference having this as an underpainting. Believe me, if you try to work out the tones at the same time as you're working out the colours, it becomes very, very hard. Doing it this way, all of the tones are there, I don't need to worry about it. All I've got to do is match up the colour, and then as I apply it I will instantly see whether the tone is correct or not. Be sure to watch part 2 where we look at making flesh tones and applying them. Thank you for watching.